So, hello and welcome everybody to another So-Called Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to discuss Muroc Army Air Force Base, which is where President Eisenhower supposedly had a meeting with the Rigelian Greys. And I am joined with the amazing Stephen Denman, my brother, today. How you doing, Stephen?
Hello, Zach. Yeah, I'm doing well. Feeling very tired, extremely busy, I
You
guess,
are?
as usual. Like so many individuals are. And how's everything with you?
Everything's good, yeah. Just working away, doing lots of walks and talks and ley lines, exploring the world, exploring this reality we're in. So we're going to start with the Trinity nuclear test that happened in 1945. And Stephen, what actually happened at this test site?
Well, so going back to the actual duration of World War II and looking that obviously World War II came to an end on the 8th of May 1945 with victory in Europe. Obviously, there was a lot going on with the US War Department that then became the US Defense Department. And obviously, in terms of the various kinds of testing that took place with what we would become known as A bombs and H bombs, or atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs, respectively, we have what's called the Trinity nuclear test. Now, this is obviously an event that has been very famously portrayed in the movie about Julius Robert Oppenheimer, who was an American physicist. And the Trinity nuclear test, which took place on the 16th of July 1945, took place in the Jornada del Muerto Desert, which is near Socorro in central South New Mexico. Now, during this event, it's well known that there were numerous sightings of flying discs that would then become known, obviously, as unidentified flying objects. This is obviously at the later stage after the Roswell incident took place on the 4th of July, 1947. In the Chichohan Desert, which is in Lincoln County in southern New Mexico, with the sightings of Kenneth Albert Arnold over the Cascade Mountains region in Washington State in the United States of America. But at that time, there were many sightings around the radius of the actual blast zone with this Trinity nuclear test that took place on the 16th of July, 1945 in the Jornada del Muerto Desert near the city of Socorro in central New Mexico.
So I've always found it insane that that actually even happened. There was actually they were testing nuclear bombs in their own country, apparently, to actually blow up another country, which is insane.
Yeah,
So
it is
what do you think was going on there on another level?
Looking at the interests and the hobbies of Julius Robert Oppenheimer and how he looked into the Vedic scripts and the ancient Mahabharata of Vedic India, and looking at the use of the Vimana and various what appeared to be prehistoric kinds of nuclear weaponry that are given quite detailed descriptors in these Hindu texts from Vedic India. We see that Julius Robert Oppenheimer was fascinated by what appears to be aspects of Western occultism and Eastern occultism, which he then seemed to interweave quite perfectly with nuclear physics. And the Trinity nuclear test that took place on the 16th of July 1945, what appeared to be fissures in the space-time continuum then opened up over the Jornada del Muerto Desert in central New Mexico. And literally a silver fleet of various flying discs was seen. Numerous individual flying discs or UFO spacecraft were witnessed, many by Native American Indians, some by local residents in the localized urban areas in that general district. So we do know that a lot more was going on. Now, this isn't really given any real coverage. It's never really taken seriously in terms of the journalistic sense of what took place on that day in 1945 for the Trinity nuclear test. But we have to ask, what did Julius Robert Oppenheimer really know? He was the director of the Los Alamos laboratory for the US Energy Department. Yeah. As it became known, we have to really understand, and his connection to Vannevar Bush, the American Science Administrator. And what did these individuals really know? How much of this was interconnected to, shall we say, the federal civil service within the US federal government in Washington, D.C.? And, we're in this Sacred Wisdom podcast, we're going to go on from looking at the Trinity nuclear test to obviously the actual Bikini Atoll nuclear tests that took place.
And what was the Bikini Atoll exactly? Just explain to people what that was.
So the nuclear testing at Bikini Atoll was a set of nuclear tests that were supervised and overseen by the United States Navy between 1946 to 1958 on the Bikini Atoll, which is in the Marshall Islands of the Pacific Ocean. During that event with the nuclear testing at the Bikini Atoll between 1946 to 1958, much of the photographic equipment that was on board the various vessels of the United States Navy did covertly photograph, and also I think there was even film footage on some occasions taken of, again, silver fleets of UFO spacecraft coming through fissures around the detonation zones of these various nuclear devices, which the United States Navy had been tasked with actually detonating within the Bikini Atoll, within the Marshall Islands region of the Pacific Ocean.
What do you just explain there? What are fissures, so people understand that?
A fissure is literally like a slit, a vertical opening in the space-time continuum. So it's almost as if they were waiting on the other side. It was though it was already pre-coordinated that these nuclear testing events at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, the Pacific Ocean region, were going to go ahead, and these fleets of UFO spacecraft that are now known to have been piloted by Zeta Reticulum type A grays and Zeta Reticulum type B grays, and on board also with them were various Orion grays or Rigelian grays, had been waiting to come through those various coordinated fissures that were opening in the space-time continuum once these nuclear devices were detonated around the Bikini Atoll of the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean region, or between 1946 to 1958. So, this is all under the guise of it's the United States Navy, therefore it's obviously the US Defense Department, the US federal government engaged in the Cold War nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. And so you have you have US President Harry Ship Truman, who was succeeded by the US President David Dwight Eisenhower, the very individual who was at Muroc Army Airfield, which became Edwards Air Force Base, on the 20th of February 1954, who signed the Greada Treaty with an ambassador or an envoy who'd been sent from the planet Greada, which orbits Rigel A in the Orion constellation, and one or more of these 7 to 8 feet tall Orion Greys or Rigelian Greys made this agreement, which then led to all the alien contactee events, the abductions, and so forth of the American peoples in vast numbers from that time in 1954 onwards. It's almost as if this was all pre-coordinated, starting with the Trinity nuclear tests, the nuclear testing at the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, the Pacific Ocean region. Then eventually we obviously see what happened with the Roswell incident, and there were many others. There was the Aztec incident, many other related events in the southern New Mexico area. So
I'm thinking how the audience were going to, as they're listening to this, what questions they're going to be asking. And one that throws up straight away, obviously there's a 7-year gap between the Roswell and President Eisenhower. When these beings had this meeting with Eisenhower, did they come in through some sort of space-time, what with the fissures you called them? Where did they come through there, or were they already here previous to that, and they've mixed amongst people and then kind of appeared to President Eisenhower? What do you think on that?
Well, I think there's a number of factors. So we know that it's likely that the Rigelian Greys have probably been coming and going, visiting planet Earth, leaving this solar system, folding space-time, going back to the planet Greada that orbits Rigel A in the Orion constellation, and other parts of the Orion constellation. I mean, there's, the entire Rigel system is vast. So we know it's likely that they probably had their own kinds of deep underground military bases or D1 bases on the North American continent or beneath the North American continent, as well as perhaps in other locations around planet Earth, perhaps even under the United Kingdom of Great Britain and parts of mainland Europe and so forth. But what we do know is that there was some coordinated effort, and that these various types of atomic blasts, whether it's the Trinity nuclear test, the Bikini Atoll nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, the Pacific Ocean region, these events were very, very important because, you know, a larger number of these extraterrestrials then exponentially started to appear on planet Earth than previously. I think there was a few here, small contingents in rather sporadic locations in their own constructed deep underground military bases or D1 bases, but everything seemed to accelerate exponentially after these events. I think it led up to the Greada Treaty, which itself was one of the 8 alien treaties. It wasn't the only alien treaty.
Do you want to go into any more today?
The most
would you like to discuss?
There's not going to be time for that. But yeah, I mean, you know, what took place at Holloman Air Force Base is connected to the other 7 alien treaties. But with the Greada Treaty, it was important enough in its own right. It was defined in its own right. We know that there was well over 4,500 cameras that were filming the event on that day, on the 20th of February 1954 at Murakami Airfield, which then became Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County in Southern California, when a very, very, very large metallic silver disc was seen glinting in the very bright blue skies. It was still reasonably cool because obviously it was still winter time, but even, you know, Southern California, so it was quite temperate. There wasn't a cloud in those skies, and so somewhere there is a large amount of footage of that very, very bright, very large silver metallic disc landing, and one or more of these ambassadors or envoys, you know, in the shape and form of these Orion Greys or Rigelian Greys, meeting with US President David Dwight Eisenhower, who was a 5-star US Army general as well, and very well connected to the secret society network.
It's kind of funny how 2 years later we had Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the film, come out.
Well, a lot of that was to do, yeah, it was. I mean, that movie, not digressing, was more to do with the idea of Soviet communism, sort of creeping into the Western democracy of the United States of America, and that's all connected to McCarthyism. I don't want to digress into that.
Yeah, no.
But what we see is there was a coordinated effort to bring an exponentially larger number of these Zeta Reticulum type A Greys, Zeta Reticulum type B Greys, who effectively were genetic drones and servants of the much taller Orion Greys or Rigelian Greys, and what appears to be named by many conspiracy theorists as the Orion Confederation. And obviously there's been much in terms of studies done with that, the links of the Orion Confederation to what appears to be the Draco Empire that was centered on the Alpha Draconis system and Thuban in the Draco constellation. But again, not digressing into that, what we see is a number of rather subversive events that were sort of like constructed and presented to the American people in the mainstream media as to do with the nuclear arms race and the Cold War against the Soviet Union of communist Russia, which I think was a complete and total fallacy. I think the whole of that was a charade and very clever stage crafting, and behind it was much more to do with not so much an alien threat, but allowing an alien incursion through various alien treaties that became known as the 8 alien treaties, the most prominent of which is obviously the Greada Treaty, which took place, as I said before, at Murakami Airfield, which then became Edwards Air Force Base. And it's interesting to note that Edwards Air Force Base, even today in the modern age, here in 2025, has a very long historical narrative of supernatural events involving Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings all over Edwards Air Force Base, in Kern County in Southern California, as well as ongoing very bizarre UFO sightings in that general locale of Kern County in the various open spaces and the ecosystems directly surrounding Edwards Air Force Base. So there's a lot of open-ended
Do you
questions. There's
think
a lot of
Oppenheimer knew exactly what he was kind of playing with? If we go with the idea that he was opening up like wormholes, do you think that
I think Julius Robert Oppenheimer had connections to the Kabbalah. He was very interested in Vedic Hinduism.
Yes, he
He was
was.
very interested, I think, in aspects of numerology.
Mm.
And I don't know whether I have no idea whether he had any knowledge of geomagnetic ley lines or intersections and dimensional portals. But it's known that the only two aspects of concern when it comes to both positively based and negatively based extraterrestrials and ultra terrestrials, and I think this would have been in the mind of US President Harry Ship Truman. It would have been in the mind of US President David Dwight Eisenhower, perhaps Julius Robert Oppenheimer and Vannevar Bush and many other individuals in various capacities to some extent for the US federal government in one way or another. And I think when you look at it like that, you have to say that they probably were aware that by detonating these atomic devices, it would cause ruptures or fissures in the space-time continuum, something that would then be seen by these extraterrestrials and ultra-terrestrials as something they could intervene and stop. And I think this is why so many of the intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, that have been launched from missile silos by the United States Air Force on occasions, we see malfunctions taking place on numerous US Air Force bases. And obviously they're working alongside the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, and then ultimately the US Defense Department and the Pentagon. And what you then have going on is, vast amounts of money and time is invested into building these ICBM nuclear missile silos, and they malfunction. They can't launch these intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, and they can't actually detonate them. And then suddenly over these US Air Force bases, numerous UFO spacecraft are seen appearing, teleporting in and disappearing and reappearing. Beams of light or luminescence are hitting the ground and then disappearing, which you actually see that in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, directed by, one of the most fantastic directors in film history, Steven Spielberg. And so what you see there is a lot of the Hollywood movies are giving glimpses into the actual events that have taken place, and then they become a fictional narrative in a Hollywood movie.
Do you think this is connected to Admiral Byrd in his flights to them?
I don't know whether Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd was fully connected to any of this, but we have to remember he did work for the United States Navy. You look at the timeline of Operation High Jump down in the Antarctic continent, and look at that in conjunction with the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests from 1946 to 1958. With the Bikini Atoll nuclear test, perhaps the most important aspect of this was called Operation Crossroads. And this was a Pacific pairing of nuclear weapons that were conducted by the United States Navy at the Bikini Atoll. So under Operation Crossroads, the first bomb that was detonated was called Greada, and the first test was called Able, the Able nuclear test. This took place on the 1st of July, 1946. And so that is interesting to note. The second test was the Baker atomic test, and the name of the bomb was called Helen of Bikini. So that took place beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean on the 25th of July, 1946. Now, the problem with this second detonation, the Baker nuclear test with the bomb named Helen of Bikini, the reason is because it was actually below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. When it was detonated on the 25th of July, 1946, it literally threw up thousands of feet into the airspace, literally thousands of cubic tons of radioactive seawater that then dispersed across a vast area. in
Wow.
the Bikini Atoll, and it also devastated the ecosystems in the Marshall Islands in that part of the Pacific Ocean region. So
Okay.
we understand also that from the planets and the worlds, for example, the Zeta Reticulum type A grays and the Zeta Reticulum type B grays came from, as well as the planet Greada of the tall grays or the Orion grays or the Rigelian grays, which orbits Rigel, which is in the Orion constellation. They don't have particularly wonderful, shall we say, ecosystems. In fact, large
Right.
expanses of their home worlds have become radioactive wastelands because of thousands of years of mismanagement. And obviously, that's one of the reasons they became so fascinated or interested with the land based and aquatic ecosystems on planet Earth. This is why I also believe, when you look at what happened with the Greada Treaty, that US President David Dwight Eisenhower signed with an ambassador or envoy, or more than one perhaps, of these Orion Greys or Rigelian Greys, was signed on the 20th of February 1954. You have to wonder, why was it they were so interested, that's these Orion Greys or Rigelian Greys, in taking tissue and DNA samples from millions of the American people?
And why do you think that is? Do you think bringing it up to speed, what people call NPCs and, non-playing characters, if anybody doesn't know, but what do you think that was? Do you think they were actually cloning humans to actually get a body of humans that would support their exercises or support their mission, or what was going on there?
Well, I think, that a number of issues were going on. I think one is they wanted to infiltrate and integrate their hive mind, and therefore forms of psychotronic mind control, perhaps technotronic mind control, into the thoughts of Homo sapiens or human beings, and therefore to take control over human consciousness on planet Earth. I think the other thing is their own genetics and DNA were progressively wasting away. I think that they were suffering from very long-term radioactive degradation, and I believe that they were trying to salvage their own genetics and DNA
Right.
by literally extracting tissue and DNA in the form of blood samples, from what we now know to be up to over 70 million American citizens. This was going on at a frenetic rate from around the 20th of February 1954 up until the 30th of April 2008. Then suddenly all accounts almost diminished to
Yeah.
almost zero globally, especially within the United States of America and the Dominion of Canada, to a lesser extent in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and mainland Europe, which is predominantly going to be Western Europe, really, not so much eastward, going into Poland or Bulgaria, Romania, or Latvia, or whatever, Estonia. It's much more to do with countries like France and Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany and Italy and Spain, as well as, obviously, I said, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and also the Irish Republic. There's a lot of alien abduction experiences and visitations were going on in the Irish Republic for many, many decades, and it was all connected to what had happened with the Greada Treaty. And then suddenly that seems to have all diminished to nothing. We know that there are other extraterrestrials that are now on planet Earth. We know the Atethe, or the
Yeah.
Atethians, are here, who are part of the Alliance of Good and some kind of intergalactic, intergalactic unification that we can define as a galactic council or a galactic federation of sorts. But they're here to try and preserve and restore the ecosystems of planet Earth. We
Yeah.
know that they're clearing up vast amounts of toxic waste, radioactive waste, shipwrecks and so forth that are scattered in thousands of locations all over the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and so forth, a lot of which is now mysteriously completely vanished from the sea floors. There's no evidence anything was there, which
But
again is
I
never
mean,
reported.
what I, we're chatting here, and I'm aware of all these dates, but we know previously to this, there's been extraterrestrial life on this planet. So
Yes.
there's other types of beings and other types of races that are mixing among, maybe not mixing with us, but they're definitely here. And
Yeah.
they're flying, maybe coming off planet, maybe going in planet. We don't exactly know what's going on. But the point is what were these? Were these the only dark race of beings that have come onto the planet? with not the best intentions for humanity, would you say? I mean, or
Yeah, but isn't it interesting to note that they're the ones that almost took over the management of planet Earth? Is those that are the negatively based
yeah,
extraterrestrials, that is the Orion Greys or the Rigelian Greys and their genetic clones or servants, the Zeta Reticulan type A Greys, the Zeta Reticulan type B Greys, they suddenly get this sort of long-term dominance over human beings from that time on the 20th of February
mm,
1954 up until the 30th of April 2008. And you could say on a much more interdimensional level, perhaps this is part of the spiritual development of humanity, and
yeah.
maybe it's something that is so far beyond the comprehension of the majority of Homo sapiens or human beings who have chosen to incarnate here in the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension to define themselves with an ego, with the living with the concept of money and employment and just generically existing here on this planet Earth and trying to fit in and get on with their lives here.
So
Because it's
so I agree with you.
it's
So
all very, very abstract in a way.
it
you know
is. I know, and I agree with you that it's part of us, the spiritual development. But why are we seeing these just the negative beings? Why aren't we seeing these positive beings, the Atife and the other races that are here? Why are they not
Well, because
interacting?
they're predominantly non-interventionists. So, I mean, obviously, Christopher Bledsoe Senior, he's had direct experiences for many years. Obviously, he was a property developer that built or constructed large houses within Fayetteville in North Carolina and other localities within the United States of America. And Christopher Bledsoe Senior is an absolutely profound and truly incredible individual. And
Everybody
he's a
looking to him. Yes,
yeah,
100%. Christopher Bled.
fascinating gentleman and a very humble, very kind man, and
Mm.
really very unique narrative of his interactions with these Atethe that are at least 9 to 10 feet in height, with pale whitish and complexions with a tinge of pale blue, very humanoid eye, very large round irises, extremely psychic and telepathic. And they actually cured his Crohn's disease. They took him on board their UFO spacecraft, and he was
I didn't
cured of
know
his
that. Wow.
Crohn's.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, he's given that account in many interviews and
Amazing.
in podcasts and radio interviews. So what we do know is that they're benevolent, they're kind, they're helpful. They're not interested in extracting, tissue samples or DNA from blood samples from humans. They're not. They have a extremely advanced hyperdimensional civilization that we really don't comprehend. It's fully integrated with use of sacred geometry, with the 5 platonic solids that we know are part of that. Again, we don't fully understand how, and obviously that would be what you would define as the tetrahedron, the hexahedron,
Well, numbers are equal to
the
themselves. So,
octahedron, the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, and we don't understand fully how they use photonic rays or the wavelengths of light, but they're somehow able to mold and condense photonic waves or waveforms of photons and shape them, and actually do so, I believe, through the use of psychic volition. That's their minds, and are able to help shape their own spacecraft or manufacture their own spacecraft and navigate their own spacecraft beyond space-time. This is all connected to hyperdimensional physics that we really don't understand. I mean, people like Richard Charles Hoagland,
yeah.
obviously he's discussed this to some extent. You see this being mentioned quite prolifically in his book called The Monument of Mars, A City on the Edge of Forever. And we know that what took place with the Trinity nuclear tests, the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests, we do know, especially with Operation Crossroads, that many of these silver fleets of UFO spacecraft were able to enter literally the 3D holographic reality of the material dimension here on planet Earth, and had been waiting on the other side. So I believe there were these coordinates of where these devices were detonated were deliberately and specifically detonated by the United States Navy, obviously with the Operation Crossroads events, and obviously inland with the Trinity nuclear test, it was slightly different. but it was all, it was all really through the US War Department, the US Defense Department. It was all really part of the military industrial complex or the MIC. It was all coordinated. It was all pre-planned in Pacific key locations. Now, obviously, quite a lot, Zach, about ley lines and the geomagnetic energetics and resonances or whatever, and how there's dimensional portals that appear on intersections of these geomagnetic ley lines.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Did somebody like, for example, Julius Robert Oppenheimer, as an American nuclear physicist, have any awareness of that? Again, that's a speculative question. Did Vannevar Bush, the American science administrator, have any awareness of that? Again, we're not going to really know.
No.
So
it'd be nice to know. It'd be nice to know some truth. And at the moment, like with everything going on and so much confusion in the world, I do feel that we are having, this is due to all these other races and beings that are amongst us. I don't think many people can even comprehend the fact to actually accept that if there were as a living alien race amongst us, it is a very serious point, and people need to address and actually understand and actually conceive it in their minds, because if we do, how much that would dramatically shift the whole of society and the constructs that we have on society. And I feel that we've kind of come to a very dead point in our human existence, where we're kind of just treading water with so much. And everything that Stephen's talked about, I mean, when you're talking, Steve, really interesting came to mind was about the mysterious airships that were seen in the late 1890s. Now, what were they? Do you think that was another a type of alien race, or do you feel that was maybe just a breakaway civilization from humanity, or a human?
I think they were many of those, because many of them were described as being silver airships or metallic looking airships that shimmered or sparkled. I believe they may have been remnants of the airships that had been constructed in Great Tartary and the Old World Empire.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay. Wow. And so they were like,
but again, that's speculative. There's no proof of that. But
no, there's no proof. But we can only connect dots when we look at these certain parts of information, and sort of make up our own minds. But Steve, is there anything else for this podcast you'd like to add?
No, I mean, we could have gone into more detail, but more detail means it would have taken longer to go through this Sacred Wisdom podcast. There's so much information. I try to summarize it as best I can and make it as cohesive as possible to convey the actual narrative itself, which is ultimately, I believe that whether it's the Trinity nuclear tests, which were part of the Manhattan Project, or the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests that were done in the Marshall Islands, the Pacific Ocean region, and anything else that was related to that, I think it was all part of a coordinated effort to open fissures in the space-time continuum and allow an exponentially higher number or larger number of these extraterrestrials, that is the Zeta Reticulan type A grays, the Zeta Reticulan type B grays, and their masters, their controllers, who are the Orion Greys or the Rigelian Greys, so they could come onto planet Earth, and that could help to speed up or accelerate their own subterranean civilization with the construction of more deep underground military bases, various covert exchanges of occult technology, that were handed over to the military industrial complex in exchange, through what had taken place with the Greada Treaty that was signed on the 20th of February 1954 at Murakami Airfield, which became Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County in Southern California, by US President David Dwight Eisenhower. And I think they wanted that occult technology, and they were quite happy to see that exchange take place, so that over 70 million American citizens would have, shall we say, tissue samples and DNA from their blood extracted against their own consent. And that is in itself very sad and is quite malevolent, really.
Yeah, it's very sad. I mean, even just the fact of testing a nuclear bomb, as I said earlier, on their own land is absolute insanity. And the fact that we've even gone along with that what Stephen's discussed today, you can see there was so much more going on and happening. And I think what we really need to question this and really need to throw up some bigger questions. Anybody in a point of authority working in these institutions, do question it as well. You know, with the reality we're moving into, you're part of that, just like everybody else. So, you know, you need to be aware of that on a physical level, on a human level as well. We've also, as you know, everybody, we've produced quite a few books now. One of the books is called Vanished Kingdoms, which is all about Tartaria, Great Tartaria, and linking back to the amazing link Stephen just made to the mysterious airships. And that's a very interesting idea that these airships actually came from Great Tartaria. Now, that's a big possibility to what they were. But Stephen, thank you, my brother. It's been brilliant and gave me some insights. I was not aware of the other test sites that have gone on, the amount of testing that's gone on, you know, that you mentioned, eight test sites. Unbelievable. I suggest everybody watching at the moment, go and research what we've discussed, what Stephen's dug up, all the information Stephen's talked about. So please subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the member section, which is loads of content, extra podcasts and videos, all discussing a variety of subjects. But for now, it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.